Onkonko, Molweni. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you're situated in this very big world. And welcome to Spotlight session number 5 of 7 sessions, which I trust you all have been following and have been going to throughout this past week as part of UN Foundation's big brainstorm initiative. Today, we will be spending time together until 10 past 10 Eastern time. If you have troubles understanding audible English, please do turn on your captions at the bottom of your screen. To our audience, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box below. Tell us where you're calling in from and what you're most excited about for today. I guess it is only fair that I start the introductions. I am Anita Dywaba. I am a Next Generation Fellow for Gender Equality at the UN Foundation. I'm a former journalist and currently working as an innovation analyst for the United Nations Population Fund. So I, of course, am excited for this conversation because this is my entire professional career. So yes, today we have a phenomenal panel of speakers and many change makers and innovators who have been with us since the big kickoff last week. There have been over 250 young people who have joined us to explore, prototype, and launch initiatives to tackle some of humanity's greatest challenges. We have also launched 24 innovators who will be leading teams in brainstorming around solutions on some of the world's biggest complex problems. These innovators are skittled in all corners of the world, mainly in the global south. At the UN Foundation, we are committed to supporting young change makers in shaping the global agenda to tackle the world's most urgent challenges. Our Future Agenda program is designed to deliver impact for next generation young people under the age of 30 who make up half of the world's population, and the future generation, that's about 10.9 billion people who are yet to be born in this very century. Most of whom will be born in continents like Africa, my continent. So yes, these spotlight sessions is one of the ways in which we support through thought leadership, entrepreneurship, policymaking, and sharing insights and engaging in discussions. To kick off this first spotlight titled How Innovation in Technology and Storytelling Can Help Us Break Through, we will begin today's session with a fireside chat between Hilary Smith, Executive Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at NBCUniversal, and Ileri Jaiyeoba, Creative Producer at Code Red Co. I'm not sure whether she has managed to join us. Yes, so each speaker will have 5 minutes to respond to each question. So we have ample time for a Q&A session towards the end of the session for young people to engage and ask questions as well. And then we will have our second fireside chat with Jonah Kessel, Deputy Director of Opinion Videos at the New York Times, and Olasumbo Olaniyi, researcher at Africa Futures Institute, and Nneka Norville, Global Marketing and Communications Executive at Nike. So now that we've gotten a bit of context setting out the way, and for me to swiftly ease out of my little monologue, let us dive into the meat of today's session. Now, looking into the future is always challenging, especially as progress around the SDGs has been stagnant during the pandemic. I'm sure we've all seen the headlines on how COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged the global economy and has managed to undo decades worth of work in the developmental space. The promise of emerging technologies and communications can help break through bureaucratic and political hurdles, stalling progress, and help us stretch our imagination to achieve our most ambitious developmental aspirations. Now, let's kick off our first fireside chat with a reminder to our speakers to please stick to time so that we have ample time for a Q&A session and engagement with young people towards the end. And to those of you who've just joined us, please do write your questions during the comments during the session, and we will try our best to capture all of the questions and all of the comments for our speakers. I will start off with Hilary. Hilary, your unit within NBCUniversal has spearheaded a very unique initiative in the storytelling arena. Can you tell us more about this new creative impact lab that you have developed?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to speak with everybody. And I am at NBCUniversal, and at NBCUniversal, we are very focused on empowering the next generation of storytellers from diverse communities, because as a media and entertainment company, we really want to help create more access and equity in our industry. So in the last year, we launched something called the Creative Impact Lab. And the way it works is we establish partnerships with nonprofits who operate like creative agencies. These are 501c3 organizations, and they are comprised of apprentices from underrepresented communities. And they are aspiring content creators, so the future storytellers for our industry. So NBCUniversal is giving grants to these organizations, and we are commissioning them to tell the stories of our existing portfolio of nonprofits. So the company has, at the corporate level, about 45 different nonprofits across a myriad of sectors, from health and human services to education, to arts, to media and technology. And we know that those nonprofits have a critical need to tell their stories, but they don't always have the resources or the expertise to do that. So we have our creative agency nonprofit work on public service announcements, sizzle reels, even social media assets. And then our NBCUniversal executives, who are very passionate about giving back, serve as mentors on each one of these storytelling projects. So you'll have a creative agency, 3 NBCUniversal mentors. They're, at the top of their profession, people like Today Show producers or Olympics producers. And then you have a client who is receiving these assets. And when the project is finished, we run those PSAs on the platforms of NBCUniversal and Comcast so that the nonprofit gets critical exposure that they need. So we're really excited about this project and have done probably about 6 or 7 of them so far. And our goal is to do 12 a year for now.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Hilary. Maybe second question, what kind of impact have you seen so far, and how has it helped young people hone their skills?
That's a great question. So there are 3 groups of people that are impacted. The apprentices are learning, on the job skills. They are paid apprentices. We know that, unpaid internships, are just not accessible to everybody. And so they are getting, they anecdotally have been telling us about the great mentorship that they've been getting and the experience and the portfolio that they leave these projects with. The NBCUniversal employees are just so thankful to have this opportunity to share their skills and to give back. And lastly, and this is a great example of real scientific measurement, Cradles to Crayons, which is one of our first nonprofit partners that received a marketing video. They have a program where they help, it's called Giving Factory Direct, and they have a program that helps collect specific clothing for children in need. And their PSA ran on NBC Sports during the Notre Dame basketball game. And within the first 24 hours, they said they received hundreds of, viewers that reached out and wanted to donate clothing. So there's tangible results there. And then, our goal, and we're just implementing a measurement tool now, is to track where these apprentices end up, from this experience and this exposure. And our long-term goal is to pipeline some of them into roles at NBCUniversal or within the industry. So more to come on that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Hilary, for that. I think this is such an important initiative because we always say young people should be at the forefront of leading the change, but we don't have resources, and without financing for young people to be capacitated, we can't do that work. But thank you so much for that very, very powerful introduction. Maybe if we can shift to Ileri, Jaiyeoba, if you can hear us. I know you're an amazing, powerful, creative, weaving stories across arts, culture, and technology. Stories help us illuminate the past, present, and the future, helping us, light pathways for change. Can you share how storytelling can be a powerful tool for change?
Yeah. So I always like to approach storytelling from an educational lens. My background is in education, so I think anything involved with storytelling, I'm always approaching from a participatory research, a participatory narrative. I think that there's a theorist who I follow. Her name is Trinmin Ha, and she introduces this concept of speaking with as opposed to speaking on behalf of or for. And I think that when that's been very inspirational to my storytelling practices, is that I always want to engage with research or storytelling using and taking advantage of a lot of perspectives and working with others who I may be working with to tell their story, so that the story is more participatory based, community based, and also collaborative based.
That's amazing. Do you possibly have any advice for young people who are trying to create systems of change and inspire movements?
I think engaging with a participatory based practice when you are doing whatever you're doing, whether it's art or storytelling, creative storytelling, I think being very experimental with what you're doing, trying new things, being playful. I also think just engaging with different mediums. I have a hobby of working on the Super 8 camera, Kodak Vision 3. And I think something that's been really fun with that is manipulating the film when I'm processing it. And I think that finding different ways to be experimental with whatever you're doing, however you're telling a story, whether it's design, whether it's art, I think just incorporating that aspect of playfulness and experimentation. And then also a process of, when you're explaining a story, engaging with the person that you're talking with, having them engage in your story as well, so that the process is more collaborative, is also very helpful, because I think something important about storytelling is engaging with different perspectives.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I know we have a bit of time left for this segment. Maybe if we can bounce back to Hilary for another question. Hilary, if we're speaking about numbers, what type of impact has NBCUniversal seen in terms of quantitative numbers? Do you have that at your disposal? How many people have been a part of the apprenticeships, etc.? How many lives have been touched by this new creative impact lab?
I'm sorry, I was just having some technical difficulties. Can you repeat the last part of the question?
No worries. Yes, I was just asking about how many people have been involved and have been impacted by this new creative impact lab.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have about 12 nonprofits that are on the creative side. They employ, probably about 3 to 4 people on each project. So that will be about, 36 apprentices that go through the program on the creative side. We have 45 nonprofits that are going to be the recipients of the creative assets. I would say, about, we just started this, so only about 7 of them, have gone through this already. And then we have over 50 NBCUniversal volunteers that have volunteered for mentoring, and we've already been through, more than half of that list already. But, in success, once this is a well-oiled machine, we'll be able to launch multiple projects at once. And my hope is that we will be able to impact even, greater numbers of cohorts.
That's incredible. Maybe just another question from my end. In terms of sustainability, how do you ensure that such an initiative is sustainable and is able to last longer? And also, how do people apply? How do you, how do young people engage with this initiative as well?
So, well, there's a couple of ways. We really are, young people need to get in touch with the creative agencies, on the apprentice side. And there's an organization that we partner with called the Alliance for Media, Arts and Culture. So they have created a program called Arts to Work, and it's the first federally registered paid apprenticeship program in the media and entertainment industry. And that was really how we discovered a lot of these creative agencies. So starting with Arts to Work, they can place you in one of these creative agencies. So that will get you, in the apprenticeship role. But also we are rolling out a curriculum with a grant that we gave to the Alliance that's going to be giving these apprentices real training. Not only are our apprentices getting trained, but our mentors are getting trained in, how can you be the best possible mentor in the creative sector? So we are going to be rolling out a creative summit where this curriculum will be open to our apprentices. It will be virtual, so that, travel is not a boundary. And that's another great way to get involved, at a much deeper level.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for that. Maybe if we can bounce back to Ileri for a minute as well. Maybe Ileri, there's a part we missed. Maybe if you can paint us and walk us through your journey, your journey through storytelling, through the creative arts, etc., just so that you can inspire some young person out there who's wanting to charter into this space but isn't sure where to start or where to begin.
Yeah. So first of all, I do want to say I wasn't able to say it the first time, but I'm really thankful to be here and chat with everybody. So I'm the founder of an organization called Code Red Co, and we promote period wellness through literacy aid and advocacy. I think when first starting out, a lot of people had no idea what concepts, what menstrual freedom was, or what period poverty was. So I feel like I really had to start out as a teen painting a picture of what this issue was and why it was important and why it also needed funding. I think that's what got me started in storytelling and the art of storytelling and engaging with different people's stories and perspectives on the issue to kind of promote this issue that I cared so deeply about. I started having a lot of conversations with different people who had worked in organizing, who had worked in different types of nonprofits, and kind of just worked on honing the story and having different discussions with people. That kind of opened my doors to the storytelling field. Later, I got into education. I started to see organizing as an educational way to teach people about different issues that are going on in their local communities and also their state communities and just countries at large. And then after that, I worked at the New York Times in immersive storytelling. So working with different technologies to make the stories that were happening at the New York Times more immersive. So I think ultimately my perspective on storytelling is to be incredibly playful with what you do, experiment, try things that are new, but also be very critical and thoughtful about the ways in which you approach storytelling and the space that you're making in order to conduct storytelling. I think that if we want more stories to be put out there, we need to create a space where people feel safe telling their stories and safe participating in storytelling. So that also means learning how to respond to vulnerability, learning how to respond to truth telling, learning how to respond to different perspectives and also engaging in them. And sometimes that doesn't look linear. Sometimes that looks like different perspectives all layered in one. It doesn't look like this straight line of that history often tells us progress has looked like, but sometimes it just looks like a different loop. So that's my perspective on storytelling. And I think that if anyone is trying to get into it, I think thinking of storytelling in terms of a sharing, a gathering of information, and also just something that's participatory that doesn't necessarily look linear, and then also being extremely playful and critiquing stories that you've seen and also questioning things is really important to think about.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Last question from my side. For young people who are wanting to make this a career path for themselves, I always say activism, especially artivism, is such a privilege, because especially if you're coming from an underprivileged background, you don't have the luxury of just taking up art, taking up storytelling, which might not generate money to sustain you right now. What advice would you have for young people who are struggling with that, who are struggling with trying to balance whether, I want to be this artivist, there's this cause that I really like and I really want to activate around, but I also need to feed my family, I also need to feed myself. How would you suggest young people balance those two issues?
That's a good question that I'm also still navigating myself. I think it's really difficult if you don't have the resources. I feel like a lot of things, it takes a teacher, it takes time, and it takes the resource, just like swimming. For instance, you need a body of water, you need time to swim, and you need, a teacher to teach you how to swim. And I think that a lot, I don't know, it's a really difficult question for me to answer because I'm personally trying to figure that out myself. But I think like, think about what you do have. What do you have accessible to you? What do you know about art? Because I think art could look like different things. I think something that's super important is engaging in whatever hobby with the resources you do have available. So I got into, like I mentioned previously, I got into making films on the Super 8 camera, but not in the necessary, like the way you would think it is. It's not like an ordinary filmmaking. It's one where I'm manipulating the celluloid itself and playing with different chemicals and just like carving a pen into the film to just create like an image. And sometimes art isn't going to look like the typical way like other people do it. What do you have yourself? Whether that's paper, like pens, like what can you create with that? That is something that could mean something to you. I think engaging with art is a mindful practice. So anything that feels mindful and engaging for you and calms you down is important to engage in when you're thinking about it. Anything that helps you come up with challenges to, you know, community issues that you're having in your local neighborhood, that's an art. Organizing is an art. Yeah, so I would say to try and engage in those perspectives, but that's also something like I've been thinking deeply about too.
Thank you so much, Ileri. Thank you also, Hilary, as well, for that very, very powerful start. I think it was quite an interesting discussion because Hilary initially was speaking about, you know, how NBCUniversal is funding young people, and Ileri as an artivist herself, how she's able to sustain herself. Because all the time when you're speaking to young activists, when you're speaking to young people, the question around, you know, how am I supposed to sustain myself? I have a family to feed. How do I, you know, get resources? How do I, you know, where do I even begin? So I think that was a very, very important conversation for us to set the scene here today. So yes, we will move on to the second fireside chat. And now we will have Jonah and Nneka and Olasumbo to join us. The first question is to Jonah. So to the best of our knowledge, you're the only person here whose work in opinion videos for the New York Times has won an Oscar. So very big congratulations. We have an Oscar winner with us in our midst. So yeah, that is incredibly inspiring. So moving to the question, can you give us some background on how print publication and newspaper was able to reinvent itself with video?
Yeah, thank you. It's really lovely to see all the people in the chat joining from all over the world. Hi, everybody. I think the quick answer to your question is we're still doing it. Reinvention is not a static process. It's not a static thing. So we're in a constant state of evolution and iteration of trying to make ourselves a digital institution and not a newspaper. And so when we think about storytelling, we do, of course, think about things like mediums like video, photo, data, open source thing, words. Words are still important. But really what we actually focus on is how, you know, the story itself, how do we tell the most impactful story and what medium is best for that? So it might be, yeah, maybe video is the best thing. And maybe it's a verite-based film. Maybe it's an interactive video. Maybe it's user-based where someone is scrolling to control video, or maybe it's a mobile-first vertical thing. And so we're constantly having these conversations, and video is a part of that in the same way that words used to be. That, okay, our go-to medium was words. Now our go-to medium is everything. And we look at how we can be most impactful with technology and what mediums we're using. But I think it's really important to say that it hasn't been a linear process to turn into a digital publication, a digital first publication. We're constantly, I wouldn't say failing, but we're constantly learning. And it's super important. I think it's relevant to this conversation because in my process, moving from photography, from photojournalism into video journalism, it's just been a process of doing and then being like, okay, how can we do it better? And making mistakes and making them over again. And hopefully you do it a couple of times and you won't do it again. And the same thing goes on for our publication. We're constantly learning from our own experiments. And so the transformation is constant. I don't know if it will ever end. I think if it were to end, it would be a bad thing, actually. I think that would be a bad thing for both our audience and ourselves. But what we're really after is impact, and how can we impact people's lives with storytelling and with technology. And sometimes the answer to that is video, and sometimes it's not. And so, I don't know, I think these are always questions that we're constantly wrestling with, and they don't necessarily have correct answers, but they're fun to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. I think the key concept here is about adaptability. As a former media practitioner myself, the media is catered around the public. So because the public is ever evolving, the media needs to evolve with it as well. So it's about adaptability, if I can answer that. Yeah. But maybe second question, what advice would you give to your audience when it comes to creating video content? You're an Oscar winner, so what advice do you have for our audience?
Yeah. So I'll give you, I'll answer the question, but just to go back one more beat on what you just said, because I think it's really important. Listening to your audience is so critical, because if you're not listening to your audience, you're not getting feedback, and it should be in some, a conversation. And it doesn't happen in the same way you and I are talking right now, but looking at comments on articles and videos and engaging with them as well. It's a really good way to understand how people are receiving your stories, and helps you kind of direct your path. What type of stories do you want to tell? What do people think is important? And so listening is equally as important as saying. But in terms of advice, so this is like a really fun question, because you can answer it in a million different ways. And, you can talk about how technology is democratized, and, we can do things that Hollywood used to have, kind of sole ownership over. In my career, I've really been heavy with technology, and, gotten exploring with things like high-speed cinematography or infrared cinematography or, drone photography, all of that. It's very important. It's great to have beautiful films, but the thing I'd actually focus on today in terms of advice is something that doesn't have to do with technology. And two things. The first is authenticity, and the second thing is emotional power. And I'll say a beat on each. So in terms of authenticity, this is something that doesn't necessarily have to do with technology, but it's something I really have seen, on the rise of TikTok and in social media the past, 3 to 5 years. What people crave, what audiences crave, is authenticity. And you see that because, videos that go viral and have impact aren't necessarily the best technical videos. They're not the ones that have the sharpest storytelling, but they almost always are ones that have authenticity involved. And that might mean opening yourself up. It might mean finding people who can be authentic to talk to. And, it happens in so many different ways. An advertising example, I don't know if everyone remembers this video of a skateboarder drinking cranberry juice, listening to Fleetwood Mac. This video has been viewed like a gazillion times on TikTok, and the guy's just skateboarding, drinking cranberry juice. And it's possibly the best ad that Ocean Spray, or whoever was that cranberry juice, could have possibly ever imagined, because it's real. It's just a guy skateboarding and he's using their product. And so with storytelling, it's really important to try to be yourself, and also to allow people to be themselves and not shape them to whatever preconceived narratives you might have about them. And the other thing, the second beat here, is on emotional power. And this is where I think video really excels. It's something that video does better than other mediums, in my opinion. We have the power to take somebody's emotional experience wherever they are in the world and bring it to an audience someplace else. And we do that with moving sound, with moving pictures, with sound, with sequencing of images. And it's something that's just so important. And so it's really easy to get, caught up in talking about new ideas and important reporting. That's all good, and it's all necessary. But if you can deliver it through emotional stories of people, you will absolutely have more impact on your films. People connect with people. And so trying to get emotional content and emotionally driven stories is, I think, probably the most important thing you can do to get people's attention.
Yeah, that's incredible. One last question, especially around the emotion side of your answer. One of the dilemmas that I personally faced in as a journalist was because your editors will always tell you the story needs to be emotive, it needs to provoke some form of emotion, and now you have that moral, you need to have that very close moral compass to make sure that you're provoking the right emotion that will be conducive for society, and not just anger. I can remember a couple of stories where, you know, I'm from South Africa, and xenophobia is a very touchy, very sensitive topic in South Africa. And stories on, you know, foreign nationals who are arrested or et cetera, did really well, right, in our numbers. So a lot of the journalists, what they would do is they would, you know, caption their stories, 5 foreign nationals arrested, but that not being conscious of what harm that is creating in like the social public discourse. How do you manage that, making sure that, you know, you're creating the right narrative and not reproducing a very harmful narrative?
Yeah, that's a really important question. It's a really tough question too, but I think at the end of the day, truth should be guiding us. You know, it's something I really subscribe to or prescribe to, in that truthful storytelling and being ethically, you know, motivated to tell real stories is usually gets you in the right place. It doesn't mean that you won't have tough decisions. So for example, if an editor is telling you to make something emotional, that's actually not good. What you should be doing as a journalist is choosing stories where that happens naturally, and then trying to look at what's most important for people and what for them to know. Like, we're trying to make better informed citizens. We're trying to influence public policy in a positive way. And so trying to look at where policy intersects people's lives and to try to show in a truthful manner, in an authentic manner, what actual policy does to people, hopefully brings you to a place where you're telling important stories that are the right stories to be telling. But it's definitely a tricky question.
Yeah, it definitely is. Thank you so much, Jonah. Maybe if we can move on to Olasumbo. I know you have a very unique perspective to share with us on the power of art and design, to share powerful data-driven stories on sometimes very, very sensitive issues. As a spatial practitioner involved in diverse projects across diverse fields, in capacities like the African Futures Initiative, the African Contemporary Institute of Design, and Urban Better Lab, can you share how architecture could be used to create social change, positive social change at that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, I'm going to say thank you to the UN Foundation for organizing this. It's a very good opportunity for us to share some of the knowledge that we have accumulated over the years. And hello to everyone all over the world as well. I see the chat's buzzing. So to your question, I think the first thing that normally comes to mind is to sort of frame the 2 strongest themes in that question. And it's architecture. And then on the other hand, you have social change. So when you look at architecture, architecture is really about well-being. It's really about structures. It's really about emotions. And when you look at social change on the other side, it's really about how humans interact and, you know, the relationships transform cultural and social institutions. And because these changes are not static, they're quite dynamic. They have a very profound and long-term consequence of society. Now, if you put those 2 definitions side by side, you'd realize that architecture is strongly connected with societal impact. And for centuries, most people thought that, or they think that architecture is a very siloed profession. It's a very technical profession. It's quite exclusive. But very recently, with the way the world is evolving, it's also evolving to accommodate a lot of changes and a lot of influences from the social sciences, from humanities and engineering and much more. So because there's a relationship with how the society evolves and how the profession of architecture is also evolving, I would say that social change, architecture could achieve social change across many scales, first of all, across the scale of an individual, then to a city, and it moves to a community, then it will move to a country, and then it will move to a continent. So it's not just something that's small, it has very multiple, it has ripple effects. Then on the practical side, I would say that it could do this in about 4 ways. First of all is through storytelling. And then the second would be through inspiration. The third would be through collaboration. And then the fourth would be through speculation. Now, when I say true storytelling, there's really no story that happens without space. There's a spatial side to all the stories that happen, literally, whether it's virtual, whether it's digital. So architecture could tell stories that actually impact the society, and it could also create platforms to share our stories, to share experiences. A very good example of storytelling that evokes some form of emotion and happens in space that I can recall right while speaking now is the book by Chinua Achebe that says that there was a country. This is a personal reflection of his about the Biafra in Nigeria, but it happens in space, and it really harps on how we all need to share our voices and how we have to share our perspectives on very, very sensitive subjects like race, culture, identity. All of these things need to be done some way, somehow. And the professions that we have, all of these are tools to speak about these certain things. Then moving on to inspiration, because humans are very much influenced by their senses, what they see, what they touch, what they can smell, architecture has that power to create tangible prototypes in the present, but also create tangible prototypes for the future as well. And all of this encourage development or change or impact locally and globally. A very good practical example of this is the floating school at Makoko that was designed by architect Hilary. For me, I think that it's a synchronization of so many fields, the architecture world, hydrology, education, all of this in one. And not only that, it also evokes, it also helps with, the synchronization of so many of the goals in one. So it's not just targeting one of the goals. It could target multiple goals. It could be the SDG 11, it could be the SDG 7, it could be the SDG 14. All of this all in one. It could also be SDG 4. Then if you move on to collaboration, like I said previously, architecture is it used to be very siloed, but now that it's accommodating change and it's also evolving with time, you'd realize that collaborations, they're helping to help, they're influencing change, if that's the way that I would say it, they're influencing change. And because change cannot happen in isolation, it's something that we have to do. We can't keep waiting for, one person to do something and then all of us follow, especially at a crucial time like now with all the changes. You have to collaborate, look for passionate citizens, passionate organizations, passionate communities that begin to chase common good. And all these partnerships and collaborations, they span geographies, they span generations, they span communities. Another practical example of this is the African Futures, like you already mentioned, that, really, really harps on cross-disciplinary engagement. And we've seen that has really, really influenced our society. And then lastly, speculation, because architecture also provides you a wide variety of skills, resources. I was listening to everybody speak, and you could use media, you could use pictures, you could use drawings, you could use writing. It could happen so many of these forms. It presents you the opportunities to imagine and to also project futuristic ideas or solutions. Another practical example of this is the African Mobilities Initiative. And this also speculates spatial futures, particularly about African architecture and mobility. And through its approach, it's been able to create interventions and also imagine possibilities for filling gaps, for filling pauses, fulfilling niches, fulfilling observations or perspectives. All of this, I believe, I strongly believe that they're very fundamental for architecture to successfully achieve societal change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Olasumbo. There's a lot you said, and there's a lot that I gathered from that, and there's a lot of reflections that I'm making from my point of my context as well. I'm from South Africa, so that geospatial situation is a very social one, because a lot of the times you ask, okay, architecture, social, how does that, how do the two intersect? But the apartheid government used architecture for apartheid, for exactly that, for social harm. So it's a very important conversation. It's a very important conversation for us to have. Okay, last question for you. What advice could you give to young people who want to charter into this unique emerging field? Let's try to wrap it in like a minute, very quick.
That's a very interesting question. I think I just first of all use this opportunity to motivate Black females. I think it's really, really, we need more of Black females in the architecture field. It's a field that's not much representation because there's just so many complexities around it. But if you're thinking about coming into this field, I would say very specifically a number of things. The first thing, which I think some of our speakers have highlighted, is to search. You have to be very inquisitive. Do you love to change the world? Are you ready for impact? Are you inquisitive about things going on around you, or you're complacent? You know, you need to be able to look around you, look inside of you as well. And then you also need to be on a quest for knowledge. All of this encompassing the whole search idea. Be on a quest for knowledge, look out opportunities for competitions, internships, funding, all of that. And then also identify what you're interested in that quest as well. Then quickly, theoretical framing and your support. I heard Ileri mention mentorship and perspective and theories. That's also very, very important. You cannot take your ideas alone. There has to be some form of underpinning or foregrounding, you know, from maybe theorists or perspectives, all of that supports your idea. And it sometimes could be contradictory. It doesn't have to be complementary. Then I'd say originality. I heard Jonah also sort of infer something like that. Originality is very key. You have to own your ideas and you have to be proud of your ideas. There's really no other person like you in the world. So you need to own your idea. Your voice really, really matters. I don't think you should shy away from your idea. Yes, it may need some form of refinement, but be willing to put out your own idea, own your language, own your voice, own your choices as well. Then also repertoire, looking at what you have. What do I have? What skills do I need? What networks can I leverage? All of these are also under repertoire because definitely you're skilled to a particular extent, but there's always a need to get better. And then lastly, I think, which is the final point, I'd say yardstick. You need to be able to measure your growth. Is it something that you're growing quarterly, yearly? Because at the end of the day, you are not in a competition with others. You're actually in a competition with yourself, and you have to grow and you have to be able to track your growth because you cannot keep doing something over and over again and there's no progress, even if perhaps you're failing. Failure is also a track and it's a record and it's something that you can learn from. So I'll just say all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olasumbo, for that very powerful ending. So yeah, maybe if we can shift gears to Nneka quickly. I know you have 2 decades of experience in driving strategic communications campaigns for big global brands like Nike and Meta, which I find incredibly impressive also as a Black woman, you know. So yeah, my question to you, can you share some examples of the most powerful, impactful campaigns that promote collective action across sectors, and what made those campaigns break through in your point of view?
Well, first, thank you for having me, and hello to everybody around the globe and to the fellow panelists. I could actually talk about this stuff all day long. I really love this space. I think a couple of campaigns come to mind. There are so many, but I will harken back to one that I think really showed the world how powerful social media could be in advancing issues, and that's the ALS challenge. It was many years ago, but I think people still remember it. $115 million was raised for ALS, a disease that most people in the world had never heard of. And really, it made people understand through this action of dumping this ice bucket on people and people taking on the mantle, and you nominate somebody else. And it became viral because there was so much authenticity in the creation of the campaign. The person who started it really wanted people to understand what it felt like to have ALS, a disease that apparently 85% of the world didn't know about in terms of just knowledge and awareness. And so they created something very authentic and something that could really be global and could be adopted by anybody. That campaign really stands out for me. Another campaign that I love is Like a Girl.
a campaign by Always. You know, when you think about young girls and their ability to play sports and puberty and how it impacts that, it always really sat down and thought about what is the best way to address this issue in an authentic way, in a way that brings girls to the forefront, and in a way that breaks down barriers around a topic like puberty. And so I think that, you know, to this day, I use it as a kind of a gold star campaign that really broke through. And then a campaign that I worked on, I spent over 10 years in television working on social impact at Viacom. And we worked on a campaign in partnership with Snapchat called the Snapchat College Tour. And that was the ability to have people who were college students on campus show their campus on a tour via Snapchat, because we know that not every student who's applying to college has the ability to go on a tour of various colleges across the country to look at it in real time. And so that campaign, you know, an award-winning campaign, broke down barriers and really let people see colleges through the eyes of current students through a platform like Snapchat, which was relatively new at the time, and using technology as the driver. And so those campaigns are just a few that come to mind. There are so many more, but I think there's some common threads in the power of those campaigns. One, they all started with research. I think that it's very easy to get folks into a room who have a passion about something, but who aren't necessarily looking at the data. And so look at the data to really inform your decision-making on the direction that you want to go is, I think, a really important first step. I think that people mentioned earlier co-creation. So if you're doing a campaign about girls, please have a focus group with girls. Please have some women on your team creating that campaign, or else you're going to miss the mark and there's going to lack authenticity. I think, having worked in entertainment for many years, I cannot stress enough the power of influencers, whether that's entertainers, influencers in a particular space, micro-influencers. They have the ability to stretch your message so much further in a way that can reach new audiences. So it's really important to think about who are your influencers and how you engage with them. And then it has to be authentic to your business. You know, if you are in the media space, leverage media, leverage your platforms, engage entertainment. But if you're not in that space, you're in a different space, think about what you have to bring to the table that's authentic to your business, and that it really reflects the ethos of what you would do as a business. So many times businesses jump into a conversation or a social impact issue because it's the issue du jour. But do you have any experience? Is that the space that you should be playing in? And do you have kind of the authority to move change in that space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Nneka, for that. Also, I know I'm aware we're running out of time a bit, but I have one last question for you. So, you know, many people, particularly those under the age of 30, are increasingly engaging in campaigns and products that are authentic. I've been hearing the word authentic come out quite a bit in today's conversation, and have positive impact in their collective lives. So why do you think this is the case, and how does this influence the stories that we share?
Well, I think that, you know, especially corporations, we can sometimes think of consumers in not a way that humanizes them. We're talking about people that are having their own issues, people that both pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, struggled with poverty, struggled with the impact of, you know, the education system. They're struggling with their own issues. And so they feel drawn to corporations, nonprofit organizations, campaigns that are addressing issues that they themselves are dealing with in their own lives. That's why it's so important, so incredibly important that you think about your audience when you think about how you're creating these campaigns, because they will support you or they will move against you if you are not aligned with the issues of the world, climate change, education, access to resources. And so that goes back to, I think, probably the grand message of this discussion is authenticity, and really thinking about, are you bringing home that authentic message to consumers that are facing these issues themselves on an everyday basis?
That's really incredible. Thank you so much, Nneka, for that. And thank you to Jonah as well as Olasumbo for this very powerful fireside chat. Maybe if we can swiftly move on to the Q&A session, so young people can also have, you know, a chance to engage with our panelists. I'll start off with the first question. This is to Jonah, and it is, so now that we are rallying around the United Nations SDGs this year, do you have any ideas on how we can create a skateboat moment in the development goals? So remember that example you made on about the ad on the skateboard. How do we create that moment for us rallying for the SDGs?
That's a tough question. It's an important question. What I would say is you probably need to look at each SDG individually to be able to have a conversation about it. But one question I would have off the bat is does the footage already exist and we need to find it? Maybe something exists on the internet somewhere. Someone has recorded a video that really represents some solution that you can take and build off of. And that thing that's already been built is something authentic, and that's something that represents a larger issue. So maybe there's a skateboard out there that represents an SDG. I don't know, but certainly on a case-by-case basis, you'd have to look at all the goals and solutions.
I hope we find it soon, if it does exist. Yeah, thank you, Jonah. So the next question is from Wambai. This is for Ileri. What would you say is being done to bridge the gap between implementation of the SDGs, a technical field, and the communication industry, a humanized field?
Is this for Hilary or?
Ileri. Apologies, Hilary. It's Ileri.
No worries.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Okay, so the question is asking, what would you say is being done to bridge the gap between implementation of the SDGs, which is a technical field, and the communication industry, which is more of a humanized field?
That's an interesting question that I definitely need to do some reflection on myself. But I guess I would say, like, I'm curious about the person who asked the question and like what they would think is a good idea. And based upon what your answer is, I feel like you can be really creative, and whatever SDG you're really most passionate about, you can figure out a way to sort of like close the gap via the storytelling that you do as a hobby or storytelling that you do for work, whether that's humanized or action-oriented for an organization. I feel like the big thing is like being able to critique how people are doing things. I love critiquing anything. Bring anything in front of me and I will critique it, and then see how you can like add what your opinion is on it. And I think that's a way of like storytelling and being creative with the ways in which you storytell as well. So I would just say, what's your answer to that question? And then like critique what you've seen other people do in terms of that, and come up with your own version of how you want to create.
I hope Wamboy is listening and typing into the chat what she or he they them think on that issue. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I think as a person who works in development, but also in as a former communications person, I also kind of work a lot in the media space within the development space. So we need that media, we need communication tools to drive the stories and to publicize the stories. That's how we get traction. That's how we get people to invest in, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, different ways in which we can kind of look at that. It's definitely it's intertwined. Definitely, it's intertwined. But yeah, moving on to the next question. This is a question from Innocent to Olasumbo. How can we create opportunities for young people in local communities to develop their storytelling skills?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Like I said previously, I think it's really more about collaboration. You cannot do anything in isolation. So even if you're very interested, look around you. There's definitely there's someone, there's some organization, there's something that can be a lead to what it is you want to achieve. I don't know where you're domiciled. I can't say, but wherever the continent you are. Now that we're living in a very technological world, there's so many opportunities that are also at your fingertips just by searching on the internet. So I would say that maximize a lot of all of this, and definitely take it one step at a time, because I've also come to understand that people are not patient. Sometimes they feel that maybe one opportunity they get, that should be it. But sometimes it requires patience and practice and getting involved over and over again. Like Jonah said, sometimes you do the process over. Even if you fail, you learn something from it. So I think be patient with yourself, and don't get dissuaded or don't get distracted by the big picture of glamour or being celebrated. You can actually do a lot without being celebrated. I think the whole idea of impact should just be your focus. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I hope it does. Okay, I know we are running short on time. Let's try to get a question for Hilary. Hilary, there's a question from Trisha, and it says, how can a 22-year-old Black girl living in a small island developing state riddled with negative impacts of climate change get funding and support and networks I need to start telling stories that need to be heard? So this is for Hilary with an H.
It's a great question. And honestly, I think someone said earlier, it's all about research. I found, as I mentioned, through the Alliance for Media, Arts and Culture, all of these nonprofit creative agencies that, are there, to help train and develop people, exactly like, I think it's Trisha that asked the question. So I would encourage her to reach out to the Alliance. Because there are so many stories to be told, and just going back to the earlier question about bridging the gap between the Sustainable Development Goals and communications, we need people like Trisha to tell these important stories, and that's really the whole idea behind NBCUniversal's Creative Impact Lab. We want to give people like Trisha, the funding that she needs to tell those important stories, and so I really encourage her to join one of their organizations, all over the U.S. We have a dozen of them. I'm happy to follow up with her after to give her the names, but organizations like Spy Hop, RealWorks, PhillyCam, they're nonprofits that want to train students from underrepresented communities so that they can tell these stories, and they'll be paid to tell those stories.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for that. I hope Trisha was listening. The next question is for Nneka. This is from Felipe. And the question is, how do we overcome cliches as young people, as TikTok influencers, as designers of the future, with concrete ideas and innovations to tackle the world's problems?
It's a great question. I think the first thing you should do is actually step away from those platforms for a bit, because I think that the more you're on them, you want to create the next viral video, you want to create the next popular thing, and you end up copying what's already out there. And for it to truly break through, it has to be a new idea. So this is a little lo-fi, but sit with a notebook and write down your ideas, or go outside and get with nature. I think that moving away from the platform that you want to actually break through on is actually the best way for you to think of new and creative ideas that will truly kind of connect with the most people.
Thank you so much, Nneka. So for final question to all of our speakers, to kind of round things up, maybe just 1 minute each, also as a reflective question on the entire conversation we've been having today. So how can we, this is a question from Diego from Mexico, how can we influence young people through storytelling so that they can influence global policy and change how we talk about the UN and the SDGs? So maybe we can start off with, I see Jonah on, you're the first on my screen.
So I think the place I would start is your own community. You have access to the people you know, and you have access to yourself. I can't express that there's so much opportunity surrounding everybody in terms of storytelling. Sometimes we're like, oh, I need to go to some distant part of the world to tell this important story, but there's important stories all around us all the time that need to be told. And to galvanize young people around you, you're going to have better access to them. You're going to know the community. Knowing the community that you're trying to talk to is really important. So don't forget that the stories really are right around you and that they're there ready to be told.
Definitely. Thanks, Jonah. Maybe we can go to Olasumbo.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think Jonah just said something, so I'll just echo an addition. When you're talking about influence, what kind of influence do you mean as well? Because there's so many ways you can define that, and I think you need to frame that in essence. And then also you need to flesh out what your idea is, what your context is, and what your skills are. Because and also define what you mean by storytelling, because there's so many mediums under storytelling. It could be visual, it could be written, it could be oral. All of these are ways to influence people. If you're able to flesh out what it is you want to do, start small. Even though, yes, everybody says, oh, it has to influence global policy, but you have to start from somewhere. And starting with you, starting with the people around you is the best starting point. Along the way or along the journey, you see that your ideas become refined. To me, it's just like the first thing that comes to mind is like a marathon. It's a process, along the marathon, there are milestones, and at every milestone, you are not the same person. There's been progress. So just take it like that, taking one step at a time, and yeah, just be all out for impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olasumbo, for that. Hilary?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on something, and I think Jonah might have referenced this earlier, but it's so important when we're telling stories. I know we talked about the emotional connection, but I've seen so many videos from our Creative Lab project where people just feature talking heads from an organization talking about their mission and why it's important. And the ones that really resonate are not those, but they're the ones that are telling the human stories that are actually talking to the people who've been impacted by something. Those break through and really garner more attention. So I would encourage the storytelling to focus on that human connection, those personal stories, because once you establish that emotional connection, you're gonna just attract funding, awareness, more stories. The power of those stories is infinite.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much, Hilary. And lastly, Ileri?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as all the panelists have been speaking, and I think that for a lot of people think influencing has to be, or like influencing through their story or what they're creating has to be packaged up in this cute little bow or like very just packaged. But I think personally, the challenging the self, and then also, like Jonah said, like you're also working with your community and what you have available to you, and you guys as a community challenging yourselves. Your story doesn't have to be, especially if you're engaging in participatory narrative storytelling, the story doesn't have to be this like linear progress. It doesn't have to be packaged well, because different perspectives are going to clash, especially if you are engaging in a collaborative storytelling. People are going to have conflicts, and that is the reality of the situation. Instead of trying to have something pretty and packaged so that it influences this policy, why don't you start with a challenge? Why don't you do the absurd? Why don't you do the surreal? Why don't you do something that challenges people's perspectives and see where that takes you?
Thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you to the panelists for today's very, very insightful conversation. I think key takeaways from me, a lot of the conversation today has been around authenticity a lot. And I like that what you mentioned, Hilary, around storytelling not being linear. it's always having, its ups and downs, etc., etc. But yeah, unfortunately, it is time for us to wrap things up. In my native language is Xhosa, it's a ixesha liqhatshwe yinja, meaning that time is never on our side, unfortunately. But yes, thank you to all of our stellar panel speakers for this very insightful and rich conversation. And thank you to our young people on this call for this very fruitful engagement and very provocative questions and very powerful questions at that. We've heard from our speakers. Hilary, you touched a lot on the emotional connection that attracts funding, connection, and more stories. And Jonah, my key takeaway is that listening is equally as important as saying with those who are receiving the stories. And Ileri, again, look around you. Someone can be a lead to what you want to achieve. And Olasumbo, along the marathon, there are milestones, and at each and every milestone, you're not the same person. Oh goodness, it looks like we forgot Nneka. Nneka, you.
No, that's fine. We're at time. But...
Apologies for that. Apologies for that.
No.
I just told you my fault. I mean, if you quickly want to maybe have a 1 minute wrap up of the conversation and maybe answer that last question.
No,
apologies for that.
No, I think the only thing I would say is that people covered a lot of it, but think about perspective and point of view. One of the things, I love content, and I think about the King Richard movie, and so many people talked about, this is a story of Serena and Venus, but it was told through the eyes of the father. So think about, who is that point of view? Is it you, or is it somebody else that you can be telling these stories through? That might be an interesting perspective. So that's just a little piece of advice that I'll leave you all with.
Thank you so much, Nneka. Again, apologies for that. I don't know how I missed you on my screen. But yes, anyways, before we leave, please do follow us on our social media and connect with the different innovators. That's at Our Future Agenda on Instagram. And please continue to like and share our posts. The post with the most likes will be awarded the Mobilizer Award at the big pitch on the 28th of February. So please do help our young people rally up around their solutions. Also, if you want to join in the big pitch on the 28th, please scan this code on your screen or visit the ourfutureagenda.org / big brainstorm website. And please continue to join the next spotlight sessions happening every weekday at 9 a.m. till the big pitch, and use the following link you can see on your screen to register for those. So tomorrow we'll be having spotlight number 6 on meeting the challenges of climate change. I hope to see you all there. And yes, that is it from my side. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, your evening, your night, your morning, whatever it is. Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to speak to you all. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me as well.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you.